By late 2025, Microsoft Flight Simulator 24 is no longer the unplayable title that many players experienced on launch. After a year of patches, performance work and community rebuilding, the simulator now sits in a much stronger position than it did originally. Now, for players who stayed with MSFS 2020 or stepped away entirely after their first impressions, the version available by the end of this year raises a bigger question. What, in practical terms, has actually changed about the franchise? So to answer that, it's worth starting right back at the beginning. When MSFS 2024 arrived, it did so with a reputation already riding high on the success of the 2020 edition. But within hours, that goodwill was largely gone. Players hit walls of server errors, broken features, and missing content, and the new sim quickly gained a reputation as one of Microsoft's roughest modern releases. Over the year that followed, the platform went through emergency fixes, broader technical and gameplay updates, and a slow shift in community sentiment and player behaviour. And by December 25, what we have here is a game that has certainly travelled a long way from its original terrible launch state. So in this video, we're going to look through that journey from the launch problems through to the emergency fixes and the longer term updates, and really a look as well at the shifts in community sentiment. And more importantly, the current status of MSFS 2024 here at the end of 2025. So the problems started immediately and on day one. MSFS 2024's release was plagued by severe technical failures. A large number of players simply could not get into the sim at all. Loading would stall at around 97%, or they would sit in what felt like endless queues, unable to progress beyond those initial screens. Microsoft and Asobo admitted they'd underestimated launch interest. So hey, how many of you have heard that one before? It's a story as old as online gaming itself. Year after year, developers making that very self-same excuse. Now, Asobo said that load testing had only gone about as high as 200,000 concurrent users, a figure that turned out to be far too low once real players piled in and so-called completely overwhelmed their servers. Now, one of the features that a lot of people were looking forward to trying out was the new career mode. A big deal was made out of this, and people had been waiting for such a mode from the original launch of 2020. It wasn't a thing there, but it was a thing in the new edition. Unfortunately, modes like that become completely oversaturated, and that led to hours-long load times and widespread login failures. Now, the situation was so bad, in fact, that the debut of the game over on Steam was met with a mostly negative rating, and this was driven by reviews describing the sim as essentially unplayable on day one. Now, a reason for a lot of this, you may be wondering why, server overwhelm on a game like this, and that's because the client itself, almost the entire experience, was streamed in from the servers. A very small install, something like 20 gigabytes of an overall game that measured in the multiple hundreds of gigabytes. And with the servers and infrastructure totally overloaded, there was simply no way for that data to make it to users' PCs. And that's without even mentioning the smaller issues which just stacked up one after the other. Random issues such as aircraft registration numbers changing mysteriously, default key bindings that had been altered in ways that led to some rather random or strange behaviour, and a serious memory leak that could overload GPUs. And together, all of these problems created the impression of a game that just was not finished. Now, unsurprisingly, totally understandably, the reaction from the community was very swift and completely angry. A lot of people were extremely volatile here, and quite rightly so. In fact, many simmers felt that the release was premature, and I do have some memories here of people saying that the game should have actually been called Microsoft Flight Simulator 2025 and then been released quite a bit later. Okay, so here's the thing. It turns out, somewhat ironically after comments like that 2025 did indeed turn out to be the year for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, whilst the first few months of the year were pretty rough and problems were slow to get fixed, certainly the more significant ones, over the course of the year the game not only improved, but it also received a whole chunk of brand new content. Arguably, the biggest fixes have been surrounding the issues that were initially going to be some of the most beneficial for Flight Sim 2024. One of those was the cloud streaming. So Microsoft and Asobo both were very keen to keep the data on the cloud, That is, just to have a small thin client installed onto the PC and most of the data then stream in. But it turned out that this was not only problematic from a data point of view, at least for users. Really, many people just wanted to have the sim installed fully on their PCs. Eventually, Microsoft gave in, Sobo kind of made an update here, and when Sim Update 2 arrived in May, full installation was finally an available option. Now, I say full, obviously a lot of the terrain data is still kept on the cloud because this is significant volumes of data, but when it comes to the client itself, most of this is now fully installable. And yes, it's large, well over 400 gigabytes in fact. But the thing is, you now have the option to install as much as or as little of this as you like, and pretty much just from the few gigabytes of the initial installed all the way up to the full 400 plus gigabytes and anything in between. You can simply choose which packages you want to keep on your PC. Everything else will be streamed in. And this was a massive bonus to a lot of people, not only because it meant you could have everything stored locally, but also it meant for those on capped internet connections, you wouldn't have to constantly stream in volumes of massive data. This, combined with other improvements, meant that loading times become far shorter. Also, there was a lot of fixes put in there for rare crashes and internet connection drops. All of this kind of going a long way to bring in a lot more stability to the sim. On the VR side, initially having problems, these were not only fixed, but also some additional VR improvements were put in along the way, including improvements to the rendering for VR, along with a long list of VR interaction fixes. And from there, the overall cadence of updates has been pretty much consistent. We've now got Sim Update 3 that's already been released. That's three full updates for the sim itself, with the fourth one currently in beta testing. And this fourth update, due to be released in the not too distant future, is largely about performance and stability, even this far into the sim's release. We've got things such as optimized grass rendering, traffic and scenery code improvements, main thread CPU work, plus an enormous list of crash fixes would also improve and affect things such as ATC, planning, camera systems, AI pathing, and much more. Ultimately, the result of all of this is not a completely bug-free sim, because what a game is bug-free, at least fully. What we've got instead is a platform that's much more stable, a mature service that's no longer as fragile as what we had back at launch. Now, I briefly want to talk about career mode here because this is important for Flight Sim 2024. Not only was a big deal made about this on the initial launch period, leading up to launch, but also a lot of people were anticipating a career mode because this has been something that a lot of people have asked for ever since Flight Sim 2020 first arrived. It took a long time to finally turn up, came up with a new sim only to be broken. But over the past year, it's gone from promising but completely broken to something that a lot of people actually spend a lot of their time in. Now, back with Sim Update 2, we saw quite a bit of that update devoted to an entire section fixing career mode and related aspects. There are also pages of very specific changes here, things such as mission triggers being corrected, skip phase logic fixed so skip cruise no longer breaks aircraft states. We've got hypoxia and oxygen system problems being addressed, taxi ribbons and assistance tools working again, fuel on payload handling corrected, and support for added and electric vehicles as well as hybrid craft as well. We also saw some more improvements come to career mode with Sim Update 3, things such as refined mission logic, made skip cruise smarter so it can now be disabled if the aircraft is damaged or low on fuel, and improved taxi flows for helicopters, VTOL, as well as those electric aircraft. And here's the thing, developers, specifically Jörg Newman, multiple times now, who's head of Microsoft Flight Simulator, has spoken very frequently about how popular career mode is. In fact, he says there's something like a 50-50 split between career mode and free flight, and that really does point out how many people actually do play a career mode, and perhaps why Microsoft are focusing so much on getting this all improved. Hardly a surprise really, because obviously people do like targets to achieve within a game. But I think it's fair to say that here at the end of 2025, whilst career mode is still not perfect, and perhaps some would argue it's far from perfect, still all the mission breaking bugs are much rarer, grind has been tuned to be less of a problem, and some of the more repetitive dialogue has been adjusted, and perhaps more critically, people still keep coming back to it. In other words, career mode is an aspect of the game that a lot of people are very much enjoying right now. Elsewhere, Microsoft focused on aircrafts, avionics and various different systems, and this got multiple passes pretty much all over. Now, almost every default craft and system has seen at least one meaningful pass since the launch of the sim, and often this has been done with a focus on making them behave properly both in free flight as well as in career mode. A lot of this happened with Sim Update 2, which contained a huge section of aircraft fixes, and this covered pretty much everything from missing pilots in legacy MS-FS 2020 aircraft and animation problems, through to avionics issues in the AnyBuild's Airbus fleet. There's also broken checklists and over-G penalties, all of these being triggered incorrectly in career mode, and yeah, a lot of this has been fixed. And then in Sim Update 3, well, it felt like a bit more of another update here all across pretty much most of the planes. Not going to go into details here on every single plane because the list is massive. Suffice to say that Microsoft have been focusing very intently on getting all the aircraft working, well, much better. Now, with the upcoming Sim Update 4, this again is in beta right now, this extends the pattern of fixes into the avionics aspects of the sim. So we're now going to see multiple updates to Garmin units such as the G1000, the NXI, the G5000, 3000 and the G3X. Also, some of the other units are going to be updated, the Proline 21, the Primus Epic and the UNS 1A. All of these getting performance optimizations and fixes. So yeah, a lot of improvements on that side of things, but it's not all just about fixes. The world itself has also been getting bigger. So on the content side, the last year's been about expansions as well. World updates have continued both in Flight Sim 2024 as well as 2020. World updates are free across the board in both versions of the sim. They tend to release alongside each other. Basically, you get the update on both versions of the sim. So earlier on in the year, we had World Update 20, which focused on Japan. That was a return to Japan because that happened very early on with Flight Sim 2020. But it was nice to see a return back to this. And for context here, just in case you don't know, World Updates are all about improving cities and terrain in specific targeted countries. In addition to Japan, a couple of other countries were also updated. One of those was Brazil and the other was Germany. Outside of World Updates, there's been City Updates, which focus exclusively on cities. City Update 10 this year was released, that focused on the USA. A City Update 11 also focused on America as well. There's one more remaining City Update to come this year, so hopefully that should be dropping this month as of this recording, which is December 25. Talking of other 2025 content, the PlayStation 5 version of the sim is about to release. Again, as of this recording, it may be available by the time you watch this, but this is coming out early December 2025. And yeah, it's going to be the first time, I do believe, that Microsoft Flight Simulator has been available on the Sony hardware. And then later this year, Microsoft also have on their roadmap here a surprise for 2025. We don't know what that is yet, but yeah, hopefully that one's going to be pretty neat. As you can see then, Flight Sim 24 has made some pretty good recovery over the period of this year. Not only has there been a lot of fixes going in, but there's also been a pretty significant amount of content as well. So early on in the year, around about the end of last year actually, when this version of the sim launched, there was a lot of people that were unwilling to move over to Flight Sim 2024 when they already had Flight Sim 2020. And although there's no public figures available on the Microsoft platforms, we do have Steam to give us a little bit of guide as to what the player numbers are. And Flight Sim 2020 has been consistently sitting at higher player numbers, although over the course of the year this gap is starting to narrow, and that's a pretty good sign for Flight Sim 2024. And further on that note, Jörg Newman himself has stated that according to Microsoft's internal numbers, there are now more people playing Flight Sim 2024 than there are Flight Sim 2020. Of course, we don't have any way to verify that, but well, I'll leave that for you to decide what you agree with. Personally, if Jörg Newman is saying it, I'd be inclined to agree with him. Ultimately then, I do feel that Flight Sim 2024 is now in a much better place than it was a year ago. We've got improvements to core stability and performance. All of these have had some pretty significant updates. Career mode has been iterated on pretty heavily, to the point where it's now a long way from where it was back in the early days. And although that was in a bad place right then, and although it's still perhaps not perfect right now, it's certainly on the way to being a good update, and it's quite reliable now for most people. Airplanes have all been updated. These have, hopefully they get a few more passes along the way, but they're now in a much better position. And overall, yeah, we're seeing a lot of content updates as well. Also, very curious to see how this all plays out on the PlayStation 5, and of course later on, when the PSVR 2 support arrives, that's also going to be very telling. So what's pretty clear then is that throughout 2025, Microsoft have continued to invest in Flight Sim 2024, and based on the trajectory here and the trends, I'd say it's very likely they're going to continue to do that throughout 2026 as well. So yeah, whilst the launch was certainly a problem, we're now in a very different place here at the end of 25. Let me know your thoughts and feelings about all of this in the comments section below, because I'd love to hear from you. There's another video on the screen right here. Check that out if you have a moment. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. Do take care, and I'll catch you next time.